Hi, I'm Chelsea with She Sews Seams. Today I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on a very basic introduction into English paper piecing. You all have asked a lot of questions and you said you just don't know how to get started. So this is literally the most basic, simple project you can do when it comes to English paper piecing, and it takes no time at all and you'll feel very successful once you are done with it. Bonus, you don't need a sewing machine to do this project at all. For those of you that don't know, English paper piecing is the method of wrapping fabric around a template that you will then sew around the edges and connect into something else. And when you're done connecting all the pieces, you take out the paper from the back and then you're left with a design. So we're gonna do a very simple hexagon flower coaster today. Here's what you need. I'm using these paper templates. These are 1.5 inch hexagon templates, and a hexagon is measured in English paper piecing along one side. So this one side is 1.5 inches. You can get these in my Amazon store. You can get templates of all shapes and sizes, different sized hexagons, diamond shapes, all kinds of fun things. We're just doing the hexagon because it's the most common when you think of English paper piecing, and it's a really beginner friendly shape. The next thing you'll need is fabric. You can use scraps of fabric. You can use a new piece of fabric. You can get a fat quarter from Dollar Tree if you want and cut that up. My mom actually got me this pack of little pieces of fabric from Temu, I think. And they've just been sitting there and I wasn't sure what to do with them, but today is your day, little pack of fabric, because I'm gonna use these to make my hexagon flower. To back the coaster, you're gonna wanna use either a piece of felt or like a wool type fabric, something that doesn't fray. I actually picked this fleece scarf up at Dollar Tree for $1.25 and it doesn't really fray. So I'm gonna give this a try and use it as the back of my coaster. I just wanna put something on there that's a little bit absorbent so that it actually works as a coaster. As far as other supplies you'll need, I'm just using basic cotton thread, a sewing needle, and I'm going to be glue basting my templates to my fabric. But today we're gonna use the glue stick because, well, it's my favorite way. Let's get started. The first thing I like to do is just when I'm making this little project is lay out the flower the way that I'm going to sew it. So you're going to have a centerpiece and then you will build the flower around it using your other templates. So that gives you an idea of exactly how many pieces you need. And I'm reusing mine, that's why they have some folds and bends to them. I don't like to throw these away because that's wasteful. If we can reuse them as much as possible, I will use them until they disintegrate. So we've got a total of 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 hexagons. So I will need 7 pieces of fabric. So when you're choosing your fabrics for English paper piecing, it's really good. Actually, all of these are good choices. You don't want to use a fabric that has a really big print on it because it's really hard to get that into the hexagon shape. Unless you're going to do what we call fussy cutting, which is where you kind of like cut it around a specific shape or piece of something, which is fine as well. But sometimes if you're trying to save fabric, that's not the most environmentally friendly way to do things. Let's say it that way. Gosh, there's so many cute ones in here. Now, I will say these Temu fabrics are not like, they're not like the most high quality fabrics, but for a project like this, where we're just kind of testing something out, they're pretty good. I don't know what color I want to go with. Maybe some blues and purples. That'd be pretty. Deciding on those fabrics took me way longer than I would like to admit, but I think this is what we're going to go with for this project. Now, when you're laying your fabric under the template, this is a little too much fabric on the outside. I mean, you could do it, but it's not ideal. So what I'm going to do is pin this to my fabric and just trim it up a little bit in the shape of a hexagon. Why not, right? If it makes my job easier. And this doesn't have to be perfect. I would leave between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch hanging off of the edge. Okay, so this will be much easier to work with now. I'm just going to take my glue stick and work around my perimeter, making sure to get it good and sloppy on my pin. I'm going to fold my 2 side edges in, and now you can do this a bunch of different ways. I just have like a system that I've gotten accustomed to, and that's what I do. But you can fold them however makes you feel good, as long as they're nice and crisp and stuck. Okay, so that's our first hexagon. And while I'm forming the other ones, I like to lay this flat and lay something on top of it so that it starts to press it down and sort of get it nice and stuck. Let me show you again, and then I will finish these up in high speed so you don't have to sit here and watch me glue templates. This is a really good activity to do, like if you're sitting at night watching TV and you want to keep your hands busy. You can do this in your lap and it doesn't, you know, take up a whole lot of room. I love to do English paper piecing when I'm either like sitting on my porch, or I've actually discovered on our latest road trip that I'm able to do it in the car, which is kind of crazy for me because I can barely drive down a curvy road without throwing up everywhere. So I don't know, maybe the good Lord is just saying, yes, you can have this gift late in life, because I have been a car sick human my entire life. Okay, fold all those edges down, and if you find that one is sticking up a little more than you want it to, just stick some glue under it. Okay, there's your hexagon. Add that to the stack. We'll speed this up and I will finish up these hexies and then I'll show you how to sew them together. Once you have all of your hexagons glued, lay them out in the pattern that you want to follow, just so you have at least a little bit of a game plan before you start going and sewing everything together. I think that's pretty cute. Next thing you want to do is grab your sewing needle and you'll pull some thread off of your spool, thread your needle, and I like to tie a knot in one end. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to start by working around this centerpiece. So I will fold my first piece down on top of my centerpiece, and you're going to go through the corners, grabbing onto a few threads from both sides of your hexies, but don't go through the cardboard. If you do, it's not the end of the world, but it will be more difficult when you're trying to remove the papers at the end of your project. And I think this is the part that most people just get a little bit nervous about, which there's really no reason to, but you're only sewing a few tiny little pieces of that thread sticking out of your fabric. You need to make sure you're grabbing both of them because this is what's going to form your seam. And you want this to be good and sturdy. So I keep my stitches pretty close together on this. And I'm using what's called a whip stitch. And a whip stitch goes in from the right, out the left, pull the thread, and go back in through the right. So it's basically forming a spiral around the edges of your fabric. And this is a good secure stitch when you're hand sewing. There are other stitches you can do where it really locks in that stitch, but for this project, this is perfectly fine. Keep going until you get to the end of that row. And if you need a little pick-me-up at this point because you've been working hard at trying to figure out English paper piecing, once you get to the end, open up your pieces and look at that. Like, to me, that just feels successful. I feel very good when I look at this kind of thing. This is the way that I work through my English paper piecing flowers. You can do them however you want, but I try and cut my thread as little as possible because every time I cut it, I feel like that's weakening. You're tying more knots and you're not having one solid piece. So if you need to lay it back down to figure out where you're going next, my thread is it's coming out of this side. So I'm naturally thinking this would be a good next one to attach. So I'm going to fold this one over this way. And instead of sewing it, which you can, if you want to just work your way around and just get these attached to the flower, you can. But I find that if I just start working side to side, it tends to work well for me. So I'm going to work my way up this side now. If you find that your thread is getting knotted when you're pulling that through. You could always try and sew with a shorter piece of thread because sometimes having all that slack is what causes the knot to form. The other thing you can do is there's two different things that help make this glossy and kind of glide better. The cheapest option is to just get a bar of soap and press your finger down on the thread and pull it as you push down on the bar of soap. And that will coat the thread with something that's a little bit more like slick, and it helps it move through the fabric better. They also make stuff called like fabric gloss, and it's very similar feeling to like a wax. And you can get little canisters of that and run your thread over that as well. I haven't used it on this project. So far, I'm moving through pretty smoothly, but you never know. Some threads are just a little bit attitudinal. Now, on this last stitch, one thing I like to do, and again, I am not a pro at English paper piecing. I've just done some trial and error, and I try and throw in as much as I can that helps secure my stitches as best as I possibly can. So what I'm going to do is actually pull this, but not the whole way. I'm going to leave this loop here, and I'm going to put my needle back up through this loop, and that'll form a tiny knot. And you could even go back over again if you want to and do that same process twice. It just helps secure that thread, because as you use these coasters, they're going to get some wear and tear. It's just natural. So the next logical place to sew is this stitch right here. So to do that, I'm going to fold this down, and you have to command this around a little bit. Now my thread is down here, and my next stitch needs to be here. So I'm actually just going to move up here and go on like everything is normal. I'm not going to worry about having a small piece of thread that's running along my seam line. As long as you're not pulling it super tight, it's really not going to make a difference. And this is just my way of doing it. Like I said, I like to cut my thread as little as possible because a full piece of thread to me feels stronger than one that you've tied a bunch of knots in and then cut and changed out. But I'm not sure there's any actual logical basis behind that. So you do what makes you feel happy. So I'm going to work my way up here now. As I said earlier, this project, this English paper piecing in general, is such a great way to use up some of your scraps. Because let's be honest, like we always end up with like usually a little bit of extra fabric from whatever we're working on. And I hate to throw anything away. But sometimes those scraps are like pretty small. And you're like, well, obviously I can't make a new project with this, but you can. And it's called English paper piecing. Because, I mean, I've seen people make quilts with just completely mismatched fabrics you would never think to put together, but you really can't ever find fault in just a Technicolor rainbow of fabrics, right? Like, it's always going to turn out pretty if you're involving a bunch of different colors and designs and patterns. That's what makes patchwork so special. Okay, we're approaching this corner again. If you'd like to do that same process where you leave the loop and go back up through the loop to knot it, go for it. So open it back up. And I mean, like, doesn't this just make you get kind of excited? Look how pretty this is starting to look. So my next part that I'm going to sew is, I've got my thread coming out of this corner, which means I'm going to use this square or this hexie. I'm going to lay it down and I'm going to sew up this one. And it's going to be a slow go. As you first start to learn how to do English paper piecing, it's not a fast hobby. It's not something that comes together quickly. And to be honest, I think that's what I like so much about it. It's something that pieces itself together over time. And you can get your family involved in it too. Like, have your family members help cut out the fabric, or if you've got older kids who are pretty good with a glue stick, have them glue your hexies for you. It's also a great opportunity to teach them a little bit about hand sewing, because this is such a great introduction to it. You're learning a whip stitch, you're learning how to use, like, tie little knots, you're learning how to sew seams. That's all this is. I actually had a couple of my nieces working on this at the beach last year, and they really enjoyed it. My son has sewn a few of these as well. It's great for that hand-eye coordination, and it's a great way to get kids off electronics. So I tied my little knot, open it back up, and my next logical place is this seam right here. So as you can see, we're just working our way across each seam as it comes to us on this flower. I'm gonna finish sewing this exactly as I have been. I'll speed up the video and then I'll meet you back here at the end and I'll show you how to attach it to your backing, whatever fabric you decide to use for that. So like I said, I'm using a fleece scarf that I had laying around that I was going to use for another craft project. And I'm only using a small bit of it, so I actually still can use it for the other craft project, but it's just one I got from the Dollar Tree, and it's gray, and it'll make a great background. You could get felt squares from the craft store or, again, the dollar store. It doesn't have to be anything supernaturally awesome, just something that gives a little bit of squish to the back. You finish this seam, and then I will put it in high speed and finish up this flower. Okay, we've sewn all of the seams of our pretty little flower together. Isn't this so cute? This is why I love English paper piecing. I think with the hexies especially, each one is so different, and it's like Christmas morning every time you flip it over because you don't know what you're gonna get. It's like just adorable. So I'm gonna tie a couple little knots right here, trim my thread. I'm gonna trim some of these other threads that just happen to be hanging around. And the next step is I'm going to take my fleece scarf that I got from the Dollar Tree. I think this will do nicely for a backing. And you have two choices here. You can make the outline of the flower exactly the same size as, like, you could cut it right up against it, or you could leave it with a little, outline at the edge, so it peeks out, whatever makes you happy. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just cut this out so that it's the size that is a little bit easier to work with, closer to what I need. And this is where I think a lot of people come up with questions. And to answer one of the big questions I get regarding English paper piecing is, when do you take the paper out? Well, this is the time. When you are done, and essentially also whenever you have a piece of paper that is landlocked by other fabrics, in my experience, it's safe to remove that paper at that time. So if you do the glue stick method, it's going to be a little bit more pulling, but it's really not that bad. And you're not going to mess anything up as long as you are doing nice tight stitches with a whip stitch all the way around. You're good, and it will go back to its form. So this middle piece is now out, and I'm actually going to go ahead and remove the other pieces as well because I'm ready to attach this to my fabric. I leave, when I'm making like a quilt, I will leave my edge pieces in until the very end. And you'll see it'll fold back into what you wanted it to. And if it doesn't, just take your glue stick and dot it and stick it down. Right? This is why I love the glue stick method. Okay, so I've taken that piece out now and it's still holding its form. Once you get all the papers out, you can take this to your ironing board and you could press it down if you wanted to, just to make sure everything's nice and flat. So take your backing, whatever you've decided to use, lay your hexy flower on there, and we're going to pin it, because after this we're going to do a little more hand sewing just to secure this to the felt piece. Now the other thing you could do is, if you have a sewing machine and you want to just zip it around with a zigzag stitch around the edge, that can look really beautiful. But I'm trying to show you options if you don't have a sewing machine at all and you want to get started sewing. Hand sewing is a wonderful, very easily accessible option that costs nothing except a few notions. Now you can decide how you want to quilt this on here. If you wanted to, you could just stitch in the ditch, which would be just to sew in these little areas. For this flower, I think I might stitch in the ditch around this center hexagon and then let my stitches show along the far edge of the whole thing. So come up through the bottom, and I'm just sewing right over the stitches. You can bunch up a few of these on your needle at a time if you want, so that it doesn't take quite as long. I try and keep those stitches as close together as I can without completely stressing myself out, because that's not what this hobby is for. It's for chilling out and doing something that's enjoyable with your hands. Okay, we've made it around that hexagon, so I'm going to go ahead and tie this in a little knot. And then to hide that knot, like to go back through my fabric and come up further out and kind of pull it. And that usually hides the knot. If you tug it just a little bit, it'll pop through that fabric. And then it's not showing anymore. All right, now it's time to sew the perimeter. So choose where you want to start. Come up from the back and just try and make your stitches as evenly spaced out as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. I try and make them fairly small, but not too small to where I don't want to sew it anymore. Okay, so we've got our first line done. You're doing an awesome job. You're almost done. And you've done all of this by hand, using your own creativity and skill, and for that, you should be very proud of yourself. Okay, we're rounding the last few edges of our hexagon flower. And I was just sitting here thinking, like, what a wonderful gift this would make to somebody, just to let them know that you're thinking of them. Maybe you have like an elderly family on your street that might benefit from just a little something to give them, or take it to a friend if you're going to eat lunch with them. I'm all about gift giving, if y'all haven't figured that out yet. I like to show up places with things, if it's flowers or a tea towel or just something, that to let them know that I appreciate them. And even better if it's handmade, right? And this you could sit and do while you're watching an episode of your favorite show. I've been filming this the whole time, and my timer is at almost an hour. So we'll say for an hour of your time, you can make these cute little coasters, couple of them, and take them with you to visit somebody. So I just finished sewing my outline of my hexagon flower. I'm going to tie a couple quick knots, and then I'm going to slide my needle through and pull that knot where it can't be seen anymore, and then trim it down. I will remove my pins now because they are no longer needed. And we'll trim up this hexagon, and the last thing I like to do is give it just a little press to make sure that it's nice and flat. So I am going to trim it right up. I don't know, maybe I'll let it stick out just a smidge. The trick with that is just making sure that you keep it consistent around the board, so that one edge isn't like, you know, 1/8 of an inch and the next one's 2/3 of an inch. I don't know, you just want it to be nice. So if that's easier for you to just run it right up to the edge of your fabric, that's fine as well. Okay, we just trimmed around our edge. I'm going to take this over to my ironing board and press it. Get all those wrinkles out from all your handiwork. And I think it just makes it have a nice finishing touch to it. You could even put a little starch on there if you wanted to, maybe to make it nice and crisp. All right, sweet friends, here is the finished product. It took about an hour to make. I did not use a sewing machine for any of this. It costs very little. You can use scraps to make most of it. And it's something that you can do to introduce yourself to English paper piecing and see how you feel about it. This would work great as a coaster on a table. You could also put a plant on it just to make it extra fancy. Give these a try, you guys. If you have been like wondering about English paper piecing, but you're not really sure where to start, hopefully this video is helpful for you. And this tutorial sort of gives you a better explanation about English paper piecing, how it works, and gives you the confidence you need to start a project yourself. If you make one, as always, I'm gonna need you to send me a picture. You know I love to see your creations, and just so you guys know, I'm super proud of you. Whatever you make, if you decide to be creative today, that's what matters, and that's what this account is here for, is to help you along your way as you try and figure out some of these fun sewing projects. I'm Chelsea with She Sew Seams. Thanks so much for your support. Like and subscribe for more tutorial videos, and I'll see you next time.